This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD Shalaka Kulrani. We scheduled an interview earlier, but we had some technical difficulties, and we have her on now. Shalaka is a dancer and also an actor. Welcome, Shalaka. How are you?
Hi, Trudy. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking with you and your listeners. Thank you. It was great meeting you for the performance that you did at Steppenwolf with their first floor theater. So that was amazing. The performance was great with Mariana.
And it was great meeting you too. Could you describe a little bit about what you did and what led up to that performance? Just because our listeners, a lot of them did not see it, and tell us a little bit about that performance.
Sure. With that particular performance, I um So to tell a little bit about me, I am an Indian classical trained
Hmm.
dancer. I'm trained in two different dance forms. One is called Bharatanatyam, and the second one is called Kathak. So in and around of Chicago, I do perform, I dance. I used to choreograph a lot. I still do it occasionally, but at this point, I put up more work which are more dance theatrical works. They're more experimental. I uh but this particular work I was invited, like I think you were invited with your group to be part of this night or two nights by Ken Fulton. And he so the themes were about worlds ending and worlds beginning. However, the one of the piece that I worked with him, we did a collaboration, which was more along the lines of spoken word and poetry, and more about the idea of the power of words.
Hmm.
And the second one, which I did, which was a solo performance, which was also using the idea of spoken word. It was more narrative. The first one was more about being present in there and talking about language and cultures and how language can be a way that can transition you from, which it does, from one culture to the other, but also is something which is slippery for someone like me who is bilingual or trilingual. And sometimes it feels that the languages slip out of my hands, whether it is English or my own mother tongue. So the piece was more about that and the slippage or the slipperiness of languages for someone who speaks in three different tongues. And the solo piece was more about movement and dance, and it was the idea of connecting the ancient, which is where I'm trained in, because Indian classical dance forms are very ancient dance forms, and what I consider the way of my own personal way of communicating with movement. And it was a hybrid version of my way of expressing the mudras and the language of Indian classical technique. So it was a mix of ancient and what I considered to be my contemporary way of speaking with my training. And so the piece was about that, and the narrativeness about the spoken word, and the entire being was about a journey of a young girl who is trapped in a way, but still feels hope for something that she has not seen or heard, but just feels deep inside her that there is more for her. And so the idea was about this young girl who is protagonist, and she grows up she grows up in the movement part, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Yeah.
It does, it does. You're talking about the slipperiness of the language. Did you create that monologue?
The collab or the solo?
The first one.
The first one, the one where we are speaking about
Yes.
just the tongue.
Yes. Hmm.
the where me and Kenya go back and forth,
Yes.
that
Yes.
I have not created.
Hmm.
We only did our solo. So
Hmm.
that particular piece, thank you for asking that. So that particular piece where Kenya and I go back and forth, that those words are a section written by a poet whose name is Sujata Bhatt. She
Hmm.
is a poet who also grew up in different cultures,
Hmm.
different countries, and so similar experience but in a different way. And
Hmm.
that particular word, worse, was from her section of
Hmm.
writing. But when we did our own things, because there was a collab section and then I did something and then he did something in the same piece,
Hmm.
those individual sections we wrote, but what we were going back and forth, that was her section.
Got it. Got it. So the section that you wrote, so you wrote that yourself, and did you write that before being invited to this show, Worlds and Worlds Begin, or was that already part of your repertoire?
No, this was something that I wrote for the show. So
Ah.
this was after we ended up, yeah, this was after the show, yeah.
Mhm. And uh, you have an extensive background. First, you learned dance, right? And then when did you get involved in writing as well?
Little while ago, I just would I was only sharing my writing in a format of creating characters or adding something more to the character who would be dancing later. So
Hmm.
essentially, the writing was really just shared very few times, but as a basis for what would be a dance piece, essentially. And this was the first time, really, at the Steppenwolf that any kind of vocals or spoken word is something that I explored. I have never explored really writing in a poetry format or in a way that is more lyrical. It feels a little bit more in a space that I should have actually explored in the past. But this was the first time that I shared my writing in that way a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
You are a choreographer, right? You have some background and you have a lot of background in
Yes.
the
Yeah.
choreography.
Yeah.
When you are a choreographer, you have to create a story, right? The
Correct.
characters,
Yes.
and then you're in this piece you were importing that story into a prose piece, into
Yeah.
a vocal piece.
Yes. Yeah. I think this is where I'm going to be exploring more. So this was
Hmm.
the way that I wanted to. I was in a dance residency recently too, right after
Hmm.
Steppenwolf. I was at Ragdoll residency.
Hmm.
And so I was there. I just returned last Friday from there. So
Hmm.
I think this is where I'm exploring. The one that I did at Steppenwolf as a collab and as a solo was a starting point for a draft that I want to do, which is great, it's a great question to ask, where I want to use more prose and vocals and sound and listening to sounds and music in a different way through movement.
Hmm.
And so I do want to create more interdisciplinary work, but in this case, I used to use a lot of media before. In this case, I want to use more sounds and music in a more cohesive way. And I just thought writing in prose would help me to transition my writing in a way that I want to incorporate more in movement or body. Because the piece that I did at the end of 2023 was a play. So I wrote a play called Naira's Dreams. It was a solo play, and that was me writing, but I wrote in a play format. So even though some scenes still had movements, or half of the scenes had movement, and half of the scenes were monologues, essentially, the character was speaking about her journey. So it was a little bit different than what happened at Steppenwolf. It was not really prose writing, like you said. It was more straight up monologue, characters speaking to someone. And so that's really how I explore how I can use any kind of writing to move to it or get someone else to move to it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. That makes sense. Like a building blocks for creating a movement piece. So it's essentially just like something in a toolkit as a choreographer. So the writing is not just for the sake of writing for me. It's more what I can hope to create another choreography or another movement piece out of that writing. And sometimes that writing is not shared, is just kept for myself so that I know what I'm doing to create. And sometimes it is shared, like I did for the play or I did for the Steppenwolf.
Mhm. When you did the movements, when did you start training for that? And at that time, did you also train as an actor, as a writer, or were you solely concentrating on dance in the beginning?
Mostly just dance. In
Mhm.
Indian classical dance, though, there is a dramaturgical aspect. Half of the work with the dance training is done with the idea of emoting with your facial expressions, emoting with your eyes, emoting with your mudras. And then half of the training is about using your entire body as a dancer would. So you do get trained as someone who is performing different characters when you trained in Indian classical dance.
Mhm.
But I did take acting in college, and that was my minor. And I'm always training, so I'm currently also taking acting classes. Dance, I used to train with teacher until a couple of years ago, just kind of regular, just to keep up to date. My teacher has since passed away, so in that sense, as a dancer, I've been training just by myself, um, um, just because she was my touchstone for training with that, my Kathak dance teacher. But in this case, I am acting, I'm always training, and writing. I did take some. I was I did take some writing classes at Chicago Dramatists, and I do have a writing mentor who I did, who I occasionally do go to um, for advising and mentorship, or just to get through some class, which I did for the play, just to know if I'm how it's sounding, how it works, if it's going through the way that it's going. And so she's my mentor. So I do have some way of people checking into my work, but essentially, yeah, I was trained more as a dancer. Yeah. Sorry for the
Uh,
long answer.
no, that's okay. When you learned Indian classical dance, well, how old were you, and how long did it take you to train before you were able to perform before an audience?
Um, so I had a lot of different teachers. I didn't have a consistent teacher for Bharatanatyam, which is that one form that I've done, which is what you do in a plie. You kind of bend your knees and you're doing it with the earth.
Mhm.
So that particular form I started learning probably when I was 5 years old. I was born in India, so my training began in India.
Mhm.
And so I was learning there, and then I had different teachers until I was 13. So it was not really consistent, or very pretty regular. It was on and off. And then, or even until 12. And then when we moved to US, I found another teacher, but I already had most of my foundational training, most of the way that I use right now. Bharatanatyam was from the teachers in India. So most of my foundational training was done. But in Indian classical dance, there is a graduation ceremony that happens, which is called Arangetram. And in a traditional sense, it is considered your first public performance.
Mhm.
And so after that performance, you are considered a dancer who can do professional public performances. So I was already performing before that, but I really wanted to do this graduation ceremony to follow the tradition. So
Mhm.
that particular ceremony I did in US because we moved. And so that I did with a teacher here.
In
So
Chicago?
in
In Chicago?
Chicago.
Mhm.
So in that context, I could say it takes about 10 to 11 years for me, only because I didn't have a straight training. I moved countries, so I had to move teachers, and there was a gap of few years. So for me, it was probably longer than what you might hear in other people's experiences. Yeah.
It seems as if classical Indian classical dance takes a lot of control, like ballet. Um, uh,
Mhm.
and when you dance, second, um, uh, when you dance, you're telling a story, and then and when in the U.S., you know, when is it like, are there many dancers that are like you that have all these multiple different facets of training from different forms that are all put together? Or is that a way of training, or were you fortunate enough to have many different forms of training so that now you could draw from the different forms and create your choreography?
Oh, that's such a great question, Trudy. I would uh, I think you're very right. Bharatanatyam is very close to, um, yes, in terms of ballet, because it's a classical dance form, there are rules to follow, and there's a very easy way to know if you're doing something right or wrong, because there are rules to really follow. So yes, there needs to be a control, there needs to be a certain way of doing it, and it is very hard on you and taxing on your body. Because you're consistently doing most of the stuff in a plie form where your knees are out and you're really stamping hard on the ground. Not the Kathak form. The Kathak form is where you're standing straight and you're doing a lot of turns. And it's similar to what you might see in a flamenco or a tap dance because you do a lot of standing footwork. But regardless, I was fortunate enough to have most of my Bharatanatyam, so foundational training where I could get my body really grounded in India from the teachers who were really just focused in Bharatanatyam. And then I was also fortunate that I was able to find my very first Kathak teacher in US because she was traveling US when I found her here. And so that was very fortunate. And then I also had other teachers like Nana Scheinflug, who was a modern dance teacher in Chicago. I met her through Columbia College when I was a student there. And then a few other artists that I've worked along the way. I did take some ballet. I was fortunate enough to meet another teacher. So I think not necessarily you don't do what I've done because it's not the most healthiest way to treat your body. So you don't. But in Bharatanatyam, you do get to um, do express yourself in more than one way. And which is what I said in the first. It's not always the entire body. Sometimes the body might get very quiet or very subtle, and you're only doing the expressiveness with your face and the way the face guides you. So your body's still moving, but not in a way that you would see if you're just doing a technique Bharatanatyam. So it does train the dancers in a different way and how you can use your body in a performance in a different way than maybe other dance forms can. But essentially, I was fortunate enough that my family and I had a community that could that welcomed me in Chicago, and I could learn these other forms and understand and yes, and then find a way to fuse them together to create like my own way of articulating what I want to say. Yeah.
Was your family also into dance?
No, my mom it was a is still a singer, but was a singer and she played a sitar, so she was in music.
Mm,
And that's really it. There's nobody really in my family who is in dance.
mm.
Not, yeah.
How did you become interested in dance then?
Uh, uh, I Well, I actually was doing small things as a child. In India, there are a lot of ways to do community performances
Mm,
because every occasion in Indian culture asks for some kind of dance or music as a
mm,
way of celebration. It's a very common thing, even like sometimes normal things like weddings and marriages and ceremonies and birthday. You could have a dance, people breaking out into a dance and sometimes a choreographic dance.
mm,
So there are a lot of ways to do that. So I was already doing tiny community stuff in India even before as a child. Um, but my first introduction to to see a dancer as a training thing or as a way that almost replicates what I do in school because there are rules and you need to follow certain things. That I saw a group of Bharatanatyam dancers dancing in a rehearsal. And I was just lucky enough that I somehow found myself in this rehearsal because my mom's cousin was an Indian classical dancer. So that particular day I was with them for I don't know what reason, and I saw them rehearsing. So not even on a stage, just them coming together and rehearsing. And I just thought it's such a way of having a community with other women and other artists and other creative people. And there's nothing like working with an ensemble. Even though I'm doing solo works nowadays, I still look for working with other artists in some way and especially this World's End, World's Begin was a great way to be backstage and be with this other artists. And I think that was the attractive part for me, which is being part of a community with other group of artists. And I just thought dancing was so visceral, like you connect with people right away in a class because it's such using your body and helping each other. And I think that was the reason why I wanted to take a class. And once I took the first class, that was it. I wanted to dance more. And yeah.
How much part of the day do you have to practice when you were younger and versus now? Like how many hours a day would you say? Average.
I I it changes. I would say nowadays if I do a very active focused an hour a day, that's good enough for me because I spend more time now conditioning my body to stay healthy. But since before that was hours used to be uh, maybe I don't know. Well, I don't know, but it was a long days. Yeah, I don't know, but long days.
Mhm. When you when did you start choreography, doing choreography? You first started as a dancer, but then you moved on to choreography. Where were you, and at what point did you decide to do that?
Um, as a choreography, as putting works together, I was
Mhm.
doing that in India already.
Oh,
So I was doing that when I was about 12 or 13 for like
wow.
competitions, and sometimes I would have help from other like older kids. Um, but mostly I was doing that in India for other community things. We had other annual gatherings and
Mhm.
functions. So I
Okay.
was doing stuff where it was asked to bring a group of dancers, and so somehow always found myself in a position to come up with an idea and choreograph something when there are a group of dancers. Because I probably was the most passionate and vocal about dance work then.
Mhm.
That was not the most sought after thing in India then. Uh, we were asked to focus more on studies. And I think
Mhm.
I was probably the anomaly that I was so vocal about dance. So I think I found myself in a position to just get those opportunities to do work. So I was
Mhm.
already doing that, but as soon as I came to India, I found an Indian classical company and I was contributing it in that way. And then eventually I just started creating more work for myself and getting people together to do the works that I want to do.
Do you know what caused you to become so passionate about the dance instead of like the others in school? You know, something must have inspired you.
Uh, yeah, uh, I think it is the way of communicating, which is so abstract sometimes and sometimes so specific, that I find it quite exhilarating. It's a freedom. It changes all the time, and you have option to do that. Whatever form you pick, I feel like you can be as very specific as you can when you're telling a narrative or a story, as if you are doing like a spoken word or a prose or a play. You can be so specific, and sometimes it's like a painting. It could be like an abstract painting, or things are happening, and you can see some colors here and there as an audience member, that this might be something, there's more darkness happening here, there's more moments of lightness, or there is this, they may not understand the entire thread that runs through the piece as a choreographer might, because the choreographer has to know what's happening. But it's a great freedom for me as an artist that can be explored in so many different ways. You don't necessarily have to be a certain kind of artist to do that. I mean, like certain kind of form, any form you can use, and you can do that. You can be so many different things in one particular, being a one particular artist when you are a dancer, I feel. Because I think in other mediums, you might have to pick a path, like you do this kind of painting, or you write these kind of books, or you write this kind of stories, or I think you pick a path and that becomes your way of doing it. I think in dance, it's possible for you to have different ways of doing things in different projects. I don't know. I just find more freedom in that particular medium than
Mhm.
other forms.
Well, you did mention that dance is a expression, so and story, so that does make sense. You also mentioned earlier that you keep on taking classes because dance changes. I've spoken with people in the law community, the judge community, the judicial community. They
Mm,
always have to take training because the law keeps on changing.
right.
In what way, could you give us an example? In what way does dance change? And, give us an example.
Uh, I think dance, I don't know if dance changes really. I mean, to see, yes, dance might look different when you're watching it, but I
Mhm,
think as someone who is in it, as going through it, I think the process of learning dance does not really change, especially if you're thinking about a classical form.
mhm,
Um, uh, there are some traditions that you have to follow, not because they're traditions, but mostly because it's curriculum. There are steps that if you follow, it's just going to be easier for you to do more complicated stuff later on,
mhm,
and also to have your own voice. Once you know what the rules are, you can break them because you know what they are if you want to. And so, but you need to know them really well first. And
mhm,
so I think that doesn't really change, but I think the approach to dance changes. And for that purpose, it's interesting to have conversations with younger artists or students or people who are interested in wanting to invest more time in dance. I think understanding why, and whys about why, different whys, and um, I think that's important. So in that context, yes, it's great to be part of a class or a lesson. Or currently, I like to collaborate with other artists, or artists who are expressing themselves in different ways, not essentially dance, but also dancers and choreographers who are not always who are also finding their own way to express themselves, but have a training, that they have already been trained. So I've been, but they're from different backgrounds. They're not necessarily, all of them are not essentially Indian classical dancers. Some of them are different. And I think so when I'm talking to them, these other artists, my approach to my own dance changes. And I think that in that context, the work changes. And so that is what's happening. There's a lot of intra collaborations are happening right now. There are people who are not essentially coming from the same backgrounds of dance or even the same art forms. They're collaborating with each other at a very larger scale and regularly than it used to be. This is, of course, my opinion, but I feel like that's what's happening. And I think that in that way, dance will change because yeah, because when you're talking about contemporary, what that essentially is, that you are taking what's happening in your personal life and your experiences, and you are placing those, or building your dance work with that. So using your training, but you're using what's happening with your own thoughts and feelings and emotions and your experiences, which is why it makes it contemporary, really. And so in that contemporary world, it changes because your approach changes based on what you're doing in your life. And that's what I think, but it's a little bit different than what happens in traditional careers like medicine or law, or I think that's, or political science. Things change there that are more distinct, if that makes sense. And there are clear paths and clear routes, that this was this thing in, I think, March, and now this has become this thing in May. And so you might want to know why that change has happened. So that's distinct. I don't think in dance you'll see that of a distinct change in the dance world per se. It's just that it is becoming more expansive and more open.
Mhm.
And that's a good change to have that, to have different ways of expressing your body.
This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom, Shalaka Kulrani. She is a dancer and an actor. Shalaka, is it possible that we're trying to make our society more diverse? Is that causing that more collaboration and more different kind of expression and leading to more different forms of collaborations in dance?
Oh, I think it's the other way around.
Mm.
That's a great question. I think it's the other way around. I think the artists naturally have been collaborating with each other. I think it is just so happened, like I said, more the collaborations now are more expansive. They're not just with two people who know each other, who are from the same artistic or cultural or geographical background. I think the collaborations are now happening interdisciplinarily, multidisciplined. They are also multicultural, and I think artists are doing themselves without any intention of, or bigger picture. Is just that the bigger picture is just wanting to know more about the other person, just to know more about the other, where that thought is coming from, where that vision is coming from, or to learn something more, or to express themselves in a different way. And in order to do that, sometimes it helps just to work with an artist that might take you in that direction and in that way. So it's more about just artists being artists themselves and just wanting to express themselves in a different way, have more freedom in their own forms, or to get something more for their own toolkit so that they can understand their art form differently and experiment it. There's a lot of experimentation is happening. And when that starts happening, I think automatically the art world becomes more diverse. And hopefully that is how we're trying to mirror, hopefully, what's happening in society.
When several artists come together, with their similarities or their differences uh, help drive more creativity.
I think both.
Mhm.
The similarities are at the very basic level, is that we're both creative and we want to express something creatively and artistically, and um uh yeah, and hopefully help each other, support each other, uh create a space where it's a safe space to explore uh, um ideas that you may not be able to explore by yourself. And so I think that's a basic similarity, that what artists look for to collaborate, that happens. And also for differences, sometimes the differences is also what works. You look for someone who is not exactly like you
Mhm.
in terms of how they're doing their work, and that is what you're focusing to bring into your work, so that it create something that you really cannot do on your own because you're not that person. You don't express yourself that way. You may not even be expressing or performing the art form that they do. And so in that context, you're going to come together and create something, a third thing that you can't really do on your own. And so in collaboration, similarities are always there when you do that, but I think differences is something that you'll come up with a new way of expressing that you can do on your own.
Mhm. You're also a bookkeeper and a copywriter, so those are like two separate languages, and putting things together and understanding the numbers. Well, it kind of sounds like that correlates with dance in some way. Do you find that the case?
Um, what the numbers do sometimes, yeah, I agree. Yes, I do. I feel like there is a structure in doing both of these things that I borrow, or maybe it's the vice versa. I don't know, that I borrowed from my classical training. Um, uh, yeah, so it helps in a way to sometimes know where your second step is going to be, if that makes sense. If this is the first step and second and third, as an
Mhm.
artist, sometimes that path is not exactly clear.
Mhm.
Um, but if you're doing a classical training, that path is clear. As a
Mhm.
choreographer, sometimes it's not, because these are ideas and you're trying to place them together as a writer. So you may not know where it might go. But or as a musician, but I think when you're trying to um I think it's they, they don't always go together, to all honesty. They're very completely different
Mhm.
industries and fields. And I
Mhm.
feel like there is some cross-pollination that happens, of
Mhm.
course, because it's the same brain which is doing that.
Mhm.
And um, but essentially I'm using both parts, my left and right, as we tried to describe that in art way, left and right brain, both in my non-artistic jobs and also in my artistic jobs, because you need both. You need to be analytical and creative in everything that you do. Can't really block one side of the brain. So in that context, it makes sense. There's a similarity, but otherwise they're very, very different.
Exactly. What about your work for with the Mandela South Asian Performing Arts? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I worked with them as their teaching artist. I worked with the founder of that particular organization before as a dancer and choreographer. I've taught for a very long time. I'm a teaching artist. I've taught for after school programs, in dance studios, and undergrad classes. So that is essentially what I did for them. But in this case, I was very strictly focused on Indian classical dance forms, and sometimes teaching Indian folk art, Indian folk dance art in schools through them. So that was essentially my job, and then sometimes supporting our artists, other Indian or South Asian artists, with their programming with this particular organization. Because I was working as a teaching artist, but also as a manager of operations for them.
What is the difference between Indian folk dance art and Indian classical dance?
Oh, good question. Indian folk dance, so Indian classical art, they're about, um, they have an origin, they have their origin story, but they are Indian classical dance forms, which means they're recognized, not based, not representing a certain subculture of India, if that makes sense. And Indian folk, there are many, many types of Indian folk dances, and all of them have a history in a subculture of India, which means that either whether it is a state And within that state, certain cities have their own way of expressing themselves, along with the language. That's why there's so many Indian languages. And sometimes we don't speak the same language. And so the dance reflects that part of Indian culture where they have their own language, own food, own way of dressing sometimes, and then own way of expressing themselves through art. And the dance is the most visual way that is very different in Indian culture. There's music too, and also the crafts, the making of things, the makers. But the folk dances, Bhangra that people know mostly. It comes from North. It comes from Punjab. But in Bhangra there might be a different ways of doing that too. So it is a folk. That's the way. They're not very rules to follow for folk, but there is a characterization. There is a way of doing certain things a certain way that belongs to that particular state and city and that particular subculture of India. But there is more freedom and there is more way of expressing, and it's more fun and it's more communal, because that's what folk dance is. It's more about communal and communities coming together. It's not always about performing or have a performative element about it. Academic, being an academic about it, and following certain things. It's just having fun and bringing people together and having a really good time.
And then how does Indian folk dance art and Indian classical dance um, connect with Bollywood dance?
Oh, Bollywood is it's a third branch, I suppose. But Bollywood has everything of this and then some more, because Bollywood is a name for the Indian film industry.
Yes.
Uh, so Bollywood means the dances are recorded, they're on screen. Um, that's all. But it can be anything. They are of any form. They could have an Indian classical choreography. They could have Indian folk. They could have hip hop. They could have someone who is more uh, ballet oriented or jazz, or just having some fun, just coming up with something and just having some fun on screen for that particular film. So Bollywood just means it's a dance that was created for camera, really.
Mhm. And since you're an actor, have you tried out for any Bollywood films, or are you concentrated on the States?
I am not. I hope to. As an adult, I've not really worked in India. With any projects as much. And I hope that I get to do something either 2024 or 2025, sometime in future. I don't want to name that timeline, but sometime. So I'm hoping, I don't know if it would be like a Bollywood or you would see me in a Bollywood thing, but I hope to do something in India soon, but I've not yet. Yeah.
And when you're auditioning for jobs as an actor, um, uh, do you uh, do you find any roles that could also incorporate dance, or is it just acting strictly?
I think mostly right now it's acting. It's the worlds are not exactly confused for me right now.
Mhm.
Only when I write for myself, which is what I did last year, where I wrote a play that was the character was using movement and acting as a way to communicate. But other than, and I love that. I want to write for other people too, but and so I hope to create more work and projects myself where these two skills could be fused, mostly for female-oriented characters. I feel like there are still not that many women characters out there who are telling the stories or who are driving the stories. So that would be especially like marginalized stories. And so that would be great. But right now, it seems like the worlds are not exactly fused for me. They're a little bit different unless I start creating my own work, which is what I do.
What was the play that you wrote? Is there any way for our listeners to view it or read it? Is it documented?
It's documented, it's not out there yet. It was co-produced with Prop Theater. It was directed with Stefan Brun, and it was the run happened at Chicago Dramatists. The name of the play is called Naira's Dreams. This was a project that came out of a residency at High Concept Labs, which is in Pilsen. And I was a resident and a fellow there. And this project was about just exploring myths and mythological characters like deities and monsters that surrounding female identity and how we still exist with the ideas of characteristics defined for a goddess or defined for someone who is considered a monster in different mythological stories. So it was based upon that, and Naira, the character, is a fictional character derived from a story or a narrative written really about the goddess Saraswati, who is established and exists in Hindu mythology. And so it was based on that. And Naira essentially is a descent of a goddess, and she's on a quest to find three women in the world to ask a certain question. So the story was following her journey and her quest, and following her human journey also with her mental health, and also following her celestial journey because she has to do this quest for this goddess. So there are two different journeys happening, a celestial journey and a human journey, where she's also dealing with her own mental health as a human. And then so some of the scenes were done as an actor, as a theatrical play, and some of the scenes were communicated through body without her saying, and just showing her body with doing emoting what she's feeling.
How long was the play?
It was 90 minutes.
90?
90.
90?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It was 90 minutes with 10 minutes of was used for a film, because there is a film version of it. So we used 10 minutes of that in the play. But altogether it was 90 minutes.
That film version, are our listeners able to access that?
Yes, I will. It's I've been sending it to film festivals actually. So it's been getting good recognition film festivals. It got screened in India, it got screened in Paris and Seoul. It also got screened in California recently. And so I just don't have it publicly displayed yet because it's still going through some of the festival route, and some of the festivals are not done yet. So I don't know if they might get shown there. So that's why it's not publicly available, but in a few months it will be, hopefully.
Will it be shown in Chicago anytime soon?
It was just shown in January.
Oh,
Yeah, but I hope to have another screening soon. It was shown with 4 other films that were done by local Chicago filmmakers.
what was the name of the festival?
Tell me, film the full. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, okay. No worries, you could
Are you
send
sure? I mean, it was a Labyrinth Film Festival, but
Labyrinth.
yes, yes.
Okay, nice. How well do you know the Indian myths? There are a lot of them. Do you know a certain region of the myths, or are you familiar with most of them? And then do you import those ideas into your dance and into your prose? You have evidently with your play.
In the play for sure, that was the whole exploration of that. I'm born in Hindu family. That is the religion. I'm not a very active uh I'm practicing Hindu, but
Mhm,
I do know about its mythology and myth because I do come from a conservative family back in India,
mhm,
through my grandparents, and so I've known a lot about the religion. But I was fortunate, like I said, because in Indian classical dance and the Bharatanatyam, most of the characters and stories are from Hindu mythology, and
mhm,
that's how you first start performing. The characters that you play are you're playing characters from Hindu mythology. So you do get some background if you are learning Indian classical dance. But I had that, and also had a conservative family who was a very much practicing Hindu religion with the
mhm,
scriptures and the Sanskrit scriptures and the ideas of that. So I do know enough, but I do research a lot only because I'm researching more about female deities.
Mm,
So that is not as I'm not as familiar with that as I want to be.
mm. You're still learning, and then there's it's an extensive body of work, right? That all
Yeah,
that
yes,
methodology.
that ultimate, yeah, yes, yes.
So what are your coming your projects that are coming up? Where could our listeners find you?
I am going to be doing a performance in May at Newport. Um, but my next upcoming performance will be in the fall. I am going to be traveling to Europe in June because I'm doing a dance conference in Ireland, of same subject, not same subjects, but about Indian classical art and where it is going and what new things are happening. So I'm doing more presentations and conferences about it and just learning and doing more acting. But I'm hoping to do more dance, a feature-length dance work in the fall. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully I'm
And
back here again talking more specifics about it.
yes, definitely. And have you landed any acting jobs? Could our listeners find you on any maybe
Any big
shows?
shows?
Yes.
No, not yet. I hope so soon, but not yet. My agent is working to get me to audition for those where you can see me. But no, you will not be able to see me on any network shows or in TV if that's. But I'm trying to gear towards that.
Well, just give us the details when you have them, and then we'll post the link on the description with this interview and in our future interviews.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. Shalaka Kulharni, thank you so much. Did I pronounce your name right? Kulharni, right?
Kulkarni? Yeah, Kulkarni. Yeah.
Kulkarni. Okay.
Yes.
Shalaka Kulkarni, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us on
you.
WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today. And if our listeners want to learn more about you, is there anywhere that they could go?
Um, oh, that's great. Yes, they could find me on my website, which is my full name, shalakakulkarni.com,
Yeah, could
or
you
my,
spell it for us?
yes, so my first name, Shalaka, and my last name, Kulkarni, Kulkarni.com. Or the Instagram is probably also good, which is at Shalaka, my first name, Shalaka_dance. And that's where I post mostly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Shalaka. Good luck in all your creative efforts, and we'll
Thank you,
talk again
Trudy.
soon.
Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.